As always, a huge thank you to Starboard, who are once again this season's main sponsors. Starboard has a history of innovation across water sports, starting in 1994 by revolutionising the design of windsurf boards, and they've brought that bang up to date recently, bringing foil windsurfing onto the Olympic stage with their IQ foil package. Starboard got behind stand-up paddleboarding in a huge way in the early days and continue to lead the industry to reduce their environmental impact. Their focus on innovation brought them 7 world champions at the ICF Worlds last year, and all of them were using their Lima paddle range. They continue to improve and innovate their boards and their paddles for all abilities across all flavours of the sport, including adventure. And you can find out more about Starboard through their website, which is linked to in the show notes. Welcome to the SUPfm podcast with me, Simon Hutchinson. Every week, I chat with interesting people from the SUP world, or to people who can help us, the paddlers of the SUP tribe, to improve and to maximise our own experiences and our love of both the sport and the water. Every episode is designed to inspire or to help you get a deeper immersion into the sport through my conversations with leading athletes, scientists, explorers, TED speakers, and New York Times best-selling authors. And not forgetting some of the many insanely inspiring distance paddlers we've routinely had on the show. This week, I speak to someone who I've been hunting down for a chat for a while now. Blue mind is a term which is known worldwide, and the man who made the connection between all the benefits that water gives us and who introduced that combination of words is Wallace J Nichols, the author of the internationally known book Blue Mind. It's made an impression on so many people, including myself, that I had to ask him about where stand-up paddleboarding fits into the Blue Mind equation, and whether its popularity since the start of the pandemic is because, as a sport and as a pastime, it delivers on so many different levels. Here he is. Hi Jay, welcome to SUPfm.
It's so good to finally be with you for this conversation. It's overdue.
Yeah, well, it's great. And we were talking off air. I harassed you on email for quite some time to get you on. And it's a great honour to have you on the podcast because your book, Blue Mind, has been a really influential one for so many people across the world. And it's been a particular favourite amongst our listeners to the show. And we covered it in our first book club episode. And there aren't many episodes and interviews which don't at some point touch on some of the subjects that you raise directly or indirectly in your book. So it's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks for your persistence. I'm definitely a harassable person, so thanks for sticking with it.
Well, it's a pleasure. So with this question, I feel like I'm immediately treating the book and yourself in a really superficial way. But if you were describing the book to someone at a party who maybe hadn't come across it, how would you describe it to them?
Well, the book's called Blue Mind, and the phrase is just it's just a pair of words that describe something that I think we've all felt throughout our lives, but couldn't quite explain. So the book is an attempt to start to explain this feeling that we get when we're with water in any of its forms and in any of the activities that are available to do, whether it's a shower or a bath in your home, or jumping in a pool, or paddling, and all the other things we can do on boats and underwater and scuba and diving, all those things. And there's a unique feeling that water brings, and I've felt it my whole life. I've been fortunate in that way, and wanted to describe it as from the perspective of a scientist, I guess. So that's really what the book is about, is that feeling. And there have been a lot of books about the way water feels, but most of them have been more in the realm of poetry and prose rather than the science of the feeling. And so I guess that's what may make it unique. But it's caught on that the words "blue mind" have become useful in the way that I'd hoped, um, in naming this mind state that we encounter when we're near, in, on, or underwater. And that's great. It's great to be able to give something a name, because then we can talk about it better, and we can value it more, and we can prescribe it and protect it, prioritize that feeling, because it's so important. So that wasn't short enough. I wish I had given you a shorter answer at that
Well, it's a
that
big
elevator
book.
pitch, but long
Yeah.
elevator. Right?
Yeah, well, I realised it was a challenge because there's so much in there. But as you say, it's been hugely influential across the world, and it continues to make an impact. And I think, obviously, with the difficult times that we've had recently across the world, I don't know whether this shows up in the sales figures, but it certainly seems to have had an impression. And as you say, Blue Mind certainly entered the terminology as a particular thing. And also, it appears to be, rather than just the book, it seems to be sort of changing into a bit of a movement internationally. But what I want to do is to talk, first of all, how you connected the dots in an area which is one of those secrets that was kind of hidden in plain sight, and also to talk about some of the strands of your book which feed into the growth of paddleboarding and the culture of paddleboarding. But before we get into the actual detail of the book, I'd be failing in my duty as a host for this Stand Up Paddleboard podcast if I didn't point out that SUP seems to be mentioned pretty frequently in the book. And because it was published in 2014, and I'm guessing it took a few years to write it, it seems you may have been exposed to it fairly early. So what's your paddleboarding history, and how do you prefer to get to grips with water these days?
Yeah, I try to do everything I can, and especially since working on Blue Mind, it's sort of, I guess it's kind of handy that I can call stand-up paddleboarding research, but and justify it in an additional way. But I wouldn't call myself a pro or an expert, but I do enjoy paddleboarding quite a bit, and any chance I get to go out on waterways that I visit, I find it to be one of the best ways to explore a new waterway, and and meet people, and chat with them about their water, and get out and get a good workout, but really just see things. And I like canoeing and kayaking, and like being in the water, but there's just such a nice vantage on a SUP that you get, and the social aspect of it really enjoy, which is unlike swimming. When your face is in the water, you're usually not having a great conversation. Or scuba diving, it's nonverbal, but when you can move along the water and have a conversation with people, really enjoyable, and such a great way to explore all bodies of water. Um, but yeah, I was definitely aware. I mean, before the industry really exploded, I was maybe an early adopter of the technology, and very aware that it was extremely useful, and certainly wrote about it. And but I've thought a lot about boats, and I include a stand-up paddleboard kind of in the as maybe one of the earliest kinds of boats. The early canoes that people stood up in, made of reeds, essentially a stand-up paddleboard. Those are some of probably the first boats, and then obviously we've got some very large boats as well. But so I kind of, working with the boating world, I always include the SUPs kind of as the proto boat.
It's got a real ancient history, and I know sort of Laird Hamilton and Dave Kalama have got sort of modern kudos for pushing it as a sport. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There were SUPs in Africa and all across the world, obviously particularly around the Pacific. But interesting, you said, as a marine biologist, that it's a good excuse to sort of get out there on the water, and you can obviously see lots there. We had a team on from the University of Portsmouth in the last series, and they were looking at fitting technology onto a SUP fin to be able to take water samples on there. And I know that there's been some of that activity with Chris Burtish when he did the Atlantic crossing. So I think there are definitely opportunities to help assess the state of the oceans, and certainly that would be something that would be of interest to any stand-up paddleboarder, I think.
Definitely. Well, yeah, that idea of marine scientists on paddleboards, it's just the higher angle, that you just see more. You can see down into the water better than when you're kind of down low at closer to the surface. And I've studied sea turtles for a long time, and we would sometimes get out on kayaks or sit on top kayaks and paddle and catch the turtles, and sometimes have to jump on them. So being able to maybe be on a stand-up paddleboard and paddling and seeing the turtles and paddling, and then the ability to jump off of your board and grab a turtle and tag it, measure it, do all that. It's kind of, I haven't done that, but it sounds like a good plan. I'd like to.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So by way of a slight diversion, you live, I know, on a beautiful stretch of the Californian coast there, which is particularly known for its marine life. And I stayed for a week not too far away from you in a place called Moss Landing, where I know that there's a sort of marine biology sort of research station nearby. Just give us a bit of a taste of that incredible coastline and the sort of wildlife that you can see from the beaches there.
Yeah, so the Monterey Bay is protected. It's a national marine sanctuary, and the protections through the years have worked. And it's gone from being pretty beat up, like a lot of places, overfished, and that industry and others, the agriculture industry, just sort of treating the coastal waters rather poorly. But since then, with the protections, we've seen really a lot of the wildlife making a great comeback. Still a lot of work to do, but the kelp forests and all of the diversity they hold, and marine mammals, and got sea otters, just a range of fish species and kelp and algae species and seabirds, and it really is kind of an ocean Serengeti, if you will. And so on any given day, depending on the weather and how far offshore you go, you just kind of just exploding with life. Even leatherback sea turtles migrate into the bay all the way from Indonesia to feed on the jellies that are abundant there. So sometimes the visibility is very poor because there's so much plankton, but it's that plankton that makes the life just explode, and creates that rich food chain. So, and even in the coastal waters, you might be out paddling, and you pass by a couple of otters or a pod of dolphins, and or paddle into a kelp forest and get out for a swim. And it's it's a really, really wonderful place to call home, for now, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a stunning place. So we took a few weeks on a bit of a road trip, and we drove from Las Vegas through and went to Yosemite and so on, and then spent a week in a beach house down in the Monterey Bay. And we were exhausted from the journey. We sort of stepped out and onto the beach with a coffee, and there was a pod of dolphins doing their thing. So it was a spectacular welcome to that area. So absolutely love it. So clearly you love the water from a very early age, Jay. So what were your sort of early experiences of water when you were growing up that made such an impression on you?
I've learned that my experience is not everyone else's experience, and has been certainly a privilege to learn water related skills. I can't really remember learning to swim, but I must have at a very young age. And always just preferred to be in the water than on land. And part of that was I was adopted and had lots of questions about life and origins. And I stuttered badly as a kid and was kind of an introvert. And so the water was my happy place. I didn't really have to worry about people talking to you underwater, kind of to our earlier point. People don't ask questions underwater, and it's quieter, and the things that might be distracting or overwhelming in one's life just kind of disappear when you're in the water or on the water. And I knew that intuitively and was pulled towards it. It's probably why I became a marine biologist, so that I could align my career with that feeling. And I imagine there are others in the world who have done the same thing, who have maybe chosen a place to live close to water because it gives them what they need, or chosen a career, um, in some kind of aquatic industry because it feels good. And that was certainly the case for me. And later on, I started questioning that tendency. Like, what was it about the water that when I was a kid that held me in the way that I needed to be held? And what was it that led me to align my career with that feeling? And I wanted to read about that. And I went looking for a book that would explain the science of that feeling and that I had as a kid. And I couldn't find a book. And I tried to get some other people to write it so that I could read it and utilize the ideas in my own conservation work. And I failed to convince anyone to write the book I wanted to read. That's how I ended up writing it. Not because I set out initially to write it. I set out to read it, and it didn't exist. So, but I think it can, the idea stems from experience and very deeply personal, um, therapeutic experiences all the way back to childhood. Now, as a dad, I've tried to pass that on to my kids, and it works for them as well. If they're having a rough day, um, they head to the water, in any place we're traveling, or at home, or even indoors, and they've learned that, and I can see it in their lives that it's been helpful for sure.
It's kind of one of those universal things, isn't it? But just putting those pieces together, the effect on you, and then observing other people and their behaviour with the water. And you share a story in the book, I think when you were an undergrad and you take a bunch of kids to the Sea of Cortez, and they hadn't seen that expanse of water before. And there was a really special reaction to that once they'd sort of let go of their fear and sort of recognised the beauty. Could you just tell us a bit about that experience? Because that was someone else experiencing.
Yeah, that when I was at University of Arizona working on my doctorate, I met some of the leaders of the Tohono O'odham community, which is an indigenous group that outside of Tucson, and was working with some of their youth. And we decided to take a trip, but it was kind of a pilgrimage for them, because traditionally they would make the long walk from Tucson, the Arizona area, to the Sea of Cortez. But because of the border with Mexico, they had ceased doing that. And so there's this generation of young people who were missing that part of their culture. And traditionally, they would bring back salt and shells and items that you would only find in the sea and bring that back to the desert. And so we kind of came up with this plan to take a group of kids to the ocean, and none of them had seen it before. And it was just really wonderful. And any group of kids seeing the ocean for the first time is a great thing to be part of. But this had this extra layer of of legacy and tradition and practice that made it even more powerful. And the kids were, certainly enthralled and overwhelmed and full of joy. And I remember sitting on the beach, and some of the young men they didn't own shorts, board shorts or swim trunks. And we were sitting on the beach getting ready to go in. They said, "We don't have shorts." And so we got out a pocket knife and just cut the legs off our pants. And I just cut the legs off my pants too, even though I had a perfectly fine pair of board shorts ready to go. And cut our pants up and got in the ocean and taught them to snorkel. And remember one of the kids kept saying he couldn't see anything underwater. And I reminded him that he could open his eyes underwater because he had this mask on. And that was the breakthrough. And then he was just completely blown away by the underwater life that he had just never witnessed. And then he just disappeared for the day, just exploring the tide pools and snorkeling around. And it's one of my favorite things to do, really, is whether it's snorkeling on a reef or going out at night and seeing a sea turtle come out of the ocean and lay eggs. As many times as I've done those things, every time I get to be a guide, it's like you relive the first time it happened for you once more through the eyes of people who are having that experience. And I think I can look back on that time with those young people in Arizona and identify how much I enjoyed it as well, and a commitment to feeling that feeling of sharing Blue Mind essentially with as many people as possible, and just in a very, I guess you could say, in a very selfish way. I got a lot out of that, so I do it a lot, and it's mutually beneficial when it happens. So, but we were talking before we started recording a bit about the idea that if you're one of the lucky people who has the skills and the access to have a blue mind, it's sort of your responsibility to share it with those who, for whatever reason, have barriers in front of them. And the barriers could be perceptual, could be fear, but they could be physical barriers, or it could be that their water is polluted and they can't do these things, or they never learned to swim. But it's on us to grow the circle, and teach others how to enjoy the water. I mean, we're mostly water. Our planet is mostly covered with water, and it's really not only important to care about the water, but it's the greatest source of joy and peace and a sense of freedom and romance and creativity that I know of. And so let's share it, with others, and the responsibility that goes with that as stewards of the water, so that we don't overrun places, with our enthusiasm either.
Exactly, yeah. So that leads us very, very nicely on to the key things that I really wanted to talk to you about. And the reason why I found your book so powerful is it's helped to make a lot of things much clearer in my mind about stand-up paddleboarding and a lot of the subjects that we talk about on this podcast, because there are 4 really powerful topics that pop up both in the community and in the conversations that I have with our guests, and they repeat time after time. So in no particular order, they are the mental and the physical health benefits of spending time around water, obviously in our case on paddleboards. There's a real devotion and enthusiasm to protect the water environment. And the third one, something that I call the aloha factor, but there is a spirit of sort of kindness and support which exists at all levels of the sport. I know it exists in other water activities as well. And surprisingly enough, it also happens at the professional competitive level. And then finally, something which might be a result of the first 3 is a really strong and a very quick addiction in the most positive way to the immediate sort of physical and mental benefits, because it seems that people go from first-time paddlers and experimenters to fanatical enthusiasts really quickly. So I think you sort of comprehensively cover all of those. So what I'd like to do to start with, and it's the thing that we talk most about, is particularly the sort of mental and physical health aspects of water. And where that was demonstrated most recently was around the time of lockdown. And when the release came and the restrictions were lifted, everything went completely crazy in the SUP industry, because everyone had a sort of instinctive desire to get in or onto the water. And they were driven by forces which I can only think were inbuilt. And you talk a lot about those sort of primitive and evolutionary connections with the water. Could you just explain some background about that sort of inbuilt drive for that level of connection?
Yes, there's something going on inside of all of us relative to water that is innate, intuitive, not learned, and that is simply a result of the fact that we all, and by we all I mean every living organism, came from the water and evolved from the water. And if we don't have water for a week, there's no more us. We just dry out and die. And so we have this need and ability to detect the sight and sound and smell and taste of water, and then orient ourselves to it for our survival. And we share that with all the other animals and plants on Earth that are non-aquatic. And if you just wandered away from the water and forgot to bring some, you'd be in big trouble. And I think the best way that I found to illustrate it very simply, and it works on a podcast remarkably well, is if I'm in a room giving a lecture, let's just say it's a big lecture hall, 1,000 people, all seated, and I say into my microphone, I've asked my team to close and lock the doors and remove all of the water bottles from the room, and you will get water back in 3 hours. And then I just pause. And then I say, did you feel that? Did your mouth get dry at the mere suggestion that there wouldn't be water for 3 hours, just for 3 hours? And then I point out that I don't have a team. It's just me. The doors are still open, and your water bottle is exactly where you left it, under your chair or in your hands or in your bag. So if you had been observant and logical, you would have known that I was making up a story. But your brain responds so quickly and conserves water and shunts it to your vital organs, your brain, your heart, and your lungs, and stops salivating, and your mouth goes immediately dry. That's kind of like really the deep core thing that you're talking about with, people instinctively said, I got to get on a paddleboard and save my life here. I'm going nutso, and I need it. And so all living organisms on land have to figure out how to stay connected to water. And plants do it differently, obviously, because they're generally not mobile. But we all have to figure it out. And so we have that tendency already built in, and that it's on board, and it's built into our senses. Now, modern humans, we call it something else, right? We don't sit around talking about our evolutionary tendency towards, water. We talk about beauty. We talk about awe. We talk about wonder. We talk about real estate. We talk about art. We make films. If you flip through a travel magazine, it's just full of water imagery in the ads and in the editorial sections. And so we have exploited this love of water in lots of ways. If you buy a bottle of water chances are there's some mountain spring scene or some blue splash of water graphics on it that's, meant to signal to you that this is good for you. And it's almost cliche that people go to the water to celebrate, their love for a honeymoon or for um, some kind of ceremony, or that if you can afford it, you try to get a water view from where you live, or that's where you want to go vacation. But all of it stems back to this deep water connection that we need it. We need it to survive. So fast forward to modern humans, and we're mostly never more than several steps away from a knob that we can turn that will have water coming out of it. Modern life in a lot of places. Of course, there are places where people have to still walk long distance to retrieve, sometimes even poor quality water. But modern urban humans have access to water in a very different way than our ancestors did. So we don't stress about it as much, but there's still this skill set basically, and this emotional connection that is really in us for survival purposes. So that if you see water, it feels good, and that's your body saying you're okay in this place. And again, the mere suggestion that you won't have water for 3 hours just elicits this physiological response that's immediate. It's like in milliseconds, your body responds. So I find all of that fascinating, but it's the underpinning of this bigger conversation that we're having about the wellness benefits and the social benefits, the emotional benefits that come with these activities, including paddleboarding.
In some of the conversations I've had, it's a really powerful way of managing your mental health. And over here, I'm not sure whether it's the same in the States. Everyone's very much got into the sort of Wim Hof cold water, which is another sort of an addition to water treatment. But I spoke to a guy who was paddleboarding around the UK. And by the way, this isn't to be recommended, but he, for some reason, he ran out of his antidepressants. But, he ended up not actually needing them on his journey. And he put that down to spending weeks and months on the sea. And I've heard sort of similar sort of anecdotal things where people had a sort of managed move away from antidepressants as a result of wild swimming. So, there's lots of different ways water can benefit mentally. But you mentioned about the visual impact of water, and that even pictures of water can have an effect on the brain and the body, and the premium prices for properties which have a sea view. But there are other aspects to it as well. So you've got the sound. If you think about if you're trying to get to sleep, there aren't many relaxing soundtracks of traffic noise and jackhammers. It's all waves and waterfalls and rain on a tent and all of that sort of stuff. And then you've also got the feel of the water as well. And I think that's one of the things that is quite remarkable for stand-up paddleboarding, because obviously when you're swimming, you can feel the water and so on. But when you've been paddleboarding for a while, you develop the skill to be able to, stand up even in sort of quite aggressive chop. And it's almost like you're at one with the water. Your body just adjusts to the movement. And I know that that's, one of the draws of surfing as well.
Yeah, I think that you point out that you've got all of your senses. So in the Blue Mind book, I sort of unpack it and treat each of those senses separately. But the reality is they work together. They're overlapping and mixing and informing each other, and or sometimes misinforming each other for that matter. But you don't use one sense at a time typically, especially when you're on the water. You're feeling the water. You're feeling your body. You're smelling and tasting the water. You're obviously hearing it, and you're looking around and seeing this expansive blue or green or brown or gray, whatever the color happens to be, but it's that the sparkle on the water. So it's all of your senses working together to have that experience, which kind of is what Blue Mind is. It's not any one of those experiences standing alone, but this, to understand the science, we kind of pull it all apart and then put it all back together as the whole. And I think you make a good point. If you're using these activities to manage your mental emotional health, you can't always get on a paddleboard when you need it. So we need to figure out ways to bring the experience into the built environment. And it turns out that music and art make the awe and the wonder portable. So you can bring water recordings with you on a train, even though you can't bring the river on the train. You can bring images, you can bring film, you can bring books and journals and poetry. You can hang a painting of the water you love on the wall, or even better, a photograph that you took yourself, because it has more, I'd say, more emotional valence than something more generic. So making art, making recordings, making music about water, so that you can bring it with you, because you may need it to support your emotional mental health. And I've worked with a lot of people who have at least been able to dial back on the dosage of the pharmaceuticals that they've been consuming, if not completely go off them. And I'm always very careful in this realm. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not prescribing that people stop taking medication. But what we've seen is the combination of more traditional therapies and medicines with these Blue Mind activities, whether it's cold water plunges and open water swimming, paddleboarding, diving, taking long baths, so on, can help people just really dial back on the chemicals that they might be consuming for their diseases and disorders and illnesses. So it is pretty remarkable when you see it work, and people who are able to say, I don't need to take these pills when I'm engaged in these activities, but they have them available in case they do.
This is the SUPfm podcast with our guest Wallace J Nichols, and we'll be right back. As always, a huge thank you to Starboard, who are once again this season's main sponsors. Starboard has a history of innovation across water sports, starting in 1994 by revolutionising the design of windsurf boards, and they've brought that bang up to date recently, bringing foil windsurfing onto the Olympic stage with their IQ foil package. Starboard got behind stand-up paddleboarding in a huge way in the early days and continue to lead the industry to reduce their environmental impact. Their focus on innovation brought them 7 world champions at the ICF Worlds last year, and all of them were using their Lima paddle range. They continue to improve and innovate their boards and their paddles for all abilities across all flavours of the sport, including adventure. And you can find out more about Starboard through their website, which is linked to in the show notes. Now for the rest of my conversation with Wallace J Nichols. It's quite a challenge as well. I mean, you mentioned about science. Clearly, you're a scientist, and a lot of the conversations about the effects of water, I guess, to an extent, historically, have seemed maybe a little bit touchy-feely. But you talk in the book about neuroscience quite a bit, and your book coincided with a real improvement in our ability to be able to really measure the benefits of water, because particularly through imaging technology we can see more of what's actually going on in the brain from outside, so it's more scientific than just relying on anecdotes.
Mm-hmm.
Could you share some of the more memorable studies that you've either taken part in or which have proved the effects of water in a hard scientific way?
Yeah, so like you said, the old way of studying the brain was you could ask people questions while they were alive and believe what they told you, which is, people don't always know what's going on inside their head. So that's kind of how psychology went on for a while. And then you could study their brain after they were done using it. Basically, after they'd passed, you could check out their brain and say, okay, maybe there were some anomalies, maybe some injuries, some differences, and map those back to the behavior of the individual while they were alive. So now we're able to look at the human brain while it's still in use, and that's done by taking blood samples and saliva samples. It's done through neuroimaging, through fMRIs, which measure oxygen as a proxy for brain activity, and then EEGs, which measure electricity. And even those technologies are advancing. Even in recent years, we're getting more powerful neuroimaging technologies and waterproof mobile EEGs. So where that leads us is to a place where you could put on an EEG and hop on your paddleboard and go for a paddle, and a scientist could record your brain activity. Or you could sit in a bath and have your brain watched. And so some of the really cool research that's being done in, I guess you could say, a controlled environment is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There's a friend there, colleague named Justin Feinstein, who studies the brain on water, but in these float tanks. So basically, it's a hypersaline water, about 18 inches deep, that you float in, but there's no light and no sound. And his float tanks are extremely well built to remove any light or sound, any vibration of the building or traffic nearby. And he basically puts people into a brain scanner, an fMRI, then has them do a float session. And then when they pop out, they get their brain scanned again and also get asked a whole bunch of questions. But while they're floating, they're also wearing a waterproof EEG, and there's kind of a night vision kind of radar going to see how their body basically looks at your skeleton. So people aren't too freaked out about having an image of them floating naked. It's just a skeleton that's being observed. And so they put all that together, and what they found is that therapeutically, floating in water is as good as or better than many, if not all, of the other kinds of therapies that are being used to treat anxiety disorders, depression, distraction, post-traumatic stress, which are themes that this research center has been studying for quite a few years. So you can't run around always with a float tank, but there's a continuum of activities ranging from what I would call extreme blue mind to more, milder applications of the idea. So jumping in cold water for a little while, floating in your bathtub, going for a paddle, they all have elements of extreme blue mind in them. So there's this kind of continuum of activities. So when you're out on a paddleboard, you're achieving some aspects of what we would say would be the extreme version of it. Especially if you go for a swim off of your board, you're adding that element to it. You're out on the water, visually, auditorily, somatically, you're shifting into a different place. Your mind shifts into a different state. The stress hormones are decreasing. The quote unquote feel good hormones are increasing. And the things that had been distracting you they're gone. The screens are gone. Maybe the sounds of traffic and dogs barking and leaf blowers or whatever it is that distracts you on land, those go away. And your brain doesn't just go to sleep, as you may imagine. It shifts into a different mode. And that's what we call blue mind. which is good at different things. Directed attention is important, but we do so much of it on land. Mind wandering is also important, but we have a hard time doing that on land. This psychologists call it soft fascination. It's how the water holds your attention, but it isn't throwing information at you like a forest does, or like screens do. So you get this. You're not bored by the water. It holds your attention, but it doesn't demand you to process language and images and words. And so we switch into this other state, which turns out is really good at problem solving and new creative ideas, and it's good at collaboration. It's good at calm thinking, a more meditative approach to figuring things out. So we go back to the float tank. What we see is creative people go to the float tanks to solve problems or to come up with new things. Musicians and artists and entrepreneurs, elite athletes go into float tanks to hit the big reset button and take get their mind out of this rumination place where they spend so much time, self-critical thinking and frustration about a bad game or a bad day, or fear about the next day. In the water, they get away from that, and they get true mental rest. And so, we seek out these activities such as paddleboarding to get us there and onto that blue mind continuum. And I would say if you're into the research, go to Google Scholar and type in blue space or blue health or aquatic therapy. And apologies in advance, you'll lose the better part of your day to just exploring and reading and absorbing all that's going on around the world now in this realm.
Brilliant. Well, I couldn't think of a better way of spending an afternoon. So just sort of finally around the mental health benefits is also the learning experience, because one of the things that I fear is that people see paddleboarding and they see the sunsets on all social media and all of that sort of stuff, and then they get their board and they take it down and they get really frustrated that they can't stand up on the board. They keep falling in. And they don't look like everyone else on all of the sort of social media posts, so they end up getting dispirited with it. So there was something that you discussed in there, which has got a rather long name, I'm afraid, but people will bear with us, which is neuroplasticity. And as a concept, it works in terms of therapy, and it also works in terms of learning. And essentially what it is a revelation, I think, that came out of some of that imaging, that the brain works in a very similar way to if you're bodybuilding. So if you're applying weight to a muscle over time and you overload it, then that muscle sort of starts to firm up and develop. And it's exactly the same for the brain. So really, in terms of learning on a paddleboard, it's about spending time on the water and embracing the fact that everyone falls in, particularly during that early stage. And I guess for therapy as well, and all of the stuff that you just talked about in terms of flotation therapy, it's about switching from that stress state to a more relaxed state, and then that sort of develops different areas of the brain to improve those sorts of connections, and I guess that constitutes therapy.
Yeah, I think to really understand that process of learning new things and pushing through in persistence, in neuroplasticity that you mentioned, it's important to understand that your brain generally is looking for shortcuts and easy ways to do things. Like your brain is a pattern recognition machine, and it's an organ of habit. So you're naturally more comfortable in places where you're familiar and where you know how to do things and where it's easy. And when you go out of that comfort zone and try to learn a new language or learn a new skill or learn to paddleboard, it's hard. It feels it feels bad, sort of, and your brain's going, oh, I don't know how to do this. What is this move? And what is this thing in my hands? And wow, what about these waves? And my legs aren't really doing the right thing. So it's really easy to give up, or day one of learning Spanish, or if I put a violin in your hand, you go, wow, that sounds terrible. I don't want to make that noise tomorrow. So I give up. And it's understandable, but your brain likes the patterns, and it likes the routine, and it likes the familiar, and it's because it's easier and more efficient. So just notice that, recognize, okay, brain, I know what you're doing, but we're not going to do that today. We're not doing easy today, and we're not doing habits today. We're doing something new. And so, that's just recognizing that's what's going on, and that the discomfort is growth, and the discomfort is you laying down new neural pathways, and that requires some effort and some persistence and some time. Also, falling in is my favorite part. I like being in the water. So even if the water is cold, I like being in it. So when I've taken people out to learn the paddleboard, and not that I'm a great instructor, but I find myself sometimes with people who are learning these things, and I just happen to know a little more. I point that out. I say, you're going to fall in, I promise. And that's the best part. So laugh and giggle and climb back up, and then fall in again. And you see people doing these yoga moves on these paddle boards, and you think, wow, I want to do that. That's amazing. I guarantee you they've fallen so many times, before they learned how to do a handstand on a paddle board. I mean, they've been in the water, falling out of that handstand. So it's just part of it. And just, embrace the fall and the fail, and and then when you sleep on it, your brain consolidates, and it trims and it prunes and does activity while you're asleep. And then you come back the next day, and somehow you feel like you got better while you were asleep. And then your brain has kind of started to rewire, and you feel a little more confident. And so now paddling is easy, and you want to start doing some new moves and take it to the next level. And now your brain has taken that new activity called paddleboarding, and it's become more efficient, and it's turned that into a new habit. And then now you don't even have to think about pulling a paddle through the water while standing on a board. You can start to think of the next thing, the next level of skill, and it becomes automatic. And that's just remarkable to see it happening in yourself. We did a lot of it when we were little. Perhaps every week we learned something new about the world, and whether it's how to climb or how to run or how to ride a bike, and then as we get older, we tend to stay on the same track for years, especially during a pandemic. Maybe you stayed in the same room literally for months, and so it gets even harder to really break out, and that doing new things takes more effort. But that's just part of it. You push through it, keep practicing, hang out with supportive people who can give you some tips, and just keep learning.
And there are plenty of other disciplines out there as well to push your standards. SUP surfing, downwinding, even SUP polo. I haven't tried that yet, but that's a recipe for falling in. But looking forward to that. So originally I'd planned to do 4 points. I don't think we're going to make it all the way through them, but the second one, the really critical one, I did want to talk to you about. Obviously, talks to all your activities, and one of the key purposes of the book is something that I've observed amongst stand-up paddlers, which is an increasing desire to be proactive, to clean up and manage waterways, to agitate about water contamination, to pick up plastics from riverbanks and harbours. And it seems to have spawned a huge involvement of paddlers on a whole variety of different initiatives. And I think obviously there's the thing that people start to care about things they spend time exposed to. And obviously we've already said for SUP, you see the world from a whole different angle. You don't see it from the land, and that means that plastic bottles and litter and stuff like that, which is otherwise invisible, is suddenly totally visible, and it's messing up the environment that you love and you enjoy. And I guess that's one of the main drivers to want to protect it. So that's again a natural connection with something we love. And I think in your book you mentioned about being a water warrior, and clearly you've got a marine biologist background, so you've got a real interest in that, and you would have seen that firsthand through your 20 years studying turtles and your everyday exposure to water.
Yeah, there's a really powerful regenerative feedback loop that happens when Blue Mind is kind of in the mix. And if we rely solely on fear and guilt to motivate people to do the right thing, we're not going to get there. And if we rely solely on just factoids, here's data, so therefore do the right thing, that we've shown that doesn't get the results we need. So telling people, the world is covered, 3/4 of the world's covered with water. It provides protein, and it provides oxygen, and regulates climate and holds biodiversity. That's all true, and I find it fascinating and important. But it's doesn't motivate people to really get out there and fix things. But when you add to that list that it's healing, that it might be your best friend for life. It's a source of creativity. It's a source of romance. It will help the people you love feel better. It's a place to go to grieve and mourn. That pulls at the heart, all of those things, and they're true. And it compels us to want to be protectors and water warriors. And so when we tell a better water story and create a more robust value equation that doesn't undervalue the water, but it accurately depicts it, then I think what we see is people caring more and acting more and going out and doing cleanups and voting for cleaner water, voting for fixing pipes that go to the wrong place. And there's this regenerative feedback loop that results from really telling a better water story. And school kids learn the water cycle, but what's missing from the water cycle that we learn is us. We learn about evaporation, we learn about rainfall, we learn about snowfall and the rivers and how it goes back into the aquifers and cycles around and around and around. And it's a beautiful thing, but we're missing from that story. So I think we need to just update the water cycle that's taught to school children to include this extra piece that is us interacting with water and feeling whole and feeling good and feeling in love and feeling our brains work better and feeling connected and feeling like we're at home, feeling soothed. And there's just a long list of things we feel. Wouldn't it be great if we taught that to school kids so that they just knew it, that it became common knowledge and common practice for 8 billion humans to really get this thing? And I think that would lead to better health for humanity and a healthier planet through this just regenerative feedback loop that we see. I mean, you see it, I see it. I imagine everybody listening has not only seen it, but been part of it. So how do we get what we know here and what we're talking about into the minds and the hearts of everybody, literally. If you're human and you're on this little blue planet called Earth, you need to understand, have access to, and practice Blue Mind for yourself and for each other. So that's kind of what we're up to, really, is, that connection between the environment and ourselves via water. But one of the other four topics, the aloha effect, the social aspect, goes right alongside with that. When you feel awe and wonder, we've learned from the researchers who study awe and wonder that our empathy and our compassion increases. And one of the greatest sources of awe and wonder on this planet is water in all of its forms. So think about that. Well, when you get to access the water and you experience awe and wonder, it grows your empathy and compassion, and then you connect more with each other and the place you live and yourself, for that matter. Empathy for yourself, empathy for each other, and compassion for nature. Water can help provide that. So, all four of those pillars that you describe are sort of activated, and they light up, I guess you could say, more when we're interacting with the water.
Well, I'm really glad I didn't hallucinate the aloha factor, because I've been talking about that for quite some time. But I definitely see it in the sport, and on this podcast we particularly welcome innovation, and certainly your book was one of a kind. But also the way you described the best way to communicate the need for action, and you've used a whole bunch of innovative ways of engaging people and focusing on the joy of the environment rather than just being depressing and fearful about how things are going, which I think far too many do, and I totally agree with you. It doesn't engage people at all. So there's various different initiatives that you have kicked off and continue. So let's just go through some of them here. So we've got Blue Marbles. Would you just like to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it's a little over a decade ago. I noticed that the water and ocean story that we were telling was very, very sad. And there was a lot of fear and a lot of guilt in it. And I was trying to think of a way to kind of break that pattern, and given a talk at the New England Aquarium, and I got some blue marbles from the toy store, and I gave them out as people came in, and figured out during my talk what I was going to say about them. And basically it was, this is a gift. Thank you for doing good things. Pass it on, pass your glass, recycled glass blue marble on to someone that who is doing good things. Say thank you to them and ask them to pass it on and so forth. And I didn't know if it would resonate or work, but I got more feedback from that particular lecture than I'd ever had before. People had great stories. They sent notes and said, "I thank you. I passed it on to so and so, and they passed it on to their friend." And so I thought, I'll keep giving out blue marbles. So now we've given out 1 million or more, and others have given out marbles, and it's just a nice gesture of gratitude rather than fear and guilt. And they've been passed through tens of millions of hands, all corners of the globe, celebrities and rock stars and activists and advocates and paddlers and swimmers and explorers, kids, lots of kids, artists. And it's just I guess you could say it's gone a bit viral, but it's just really simple. It's playful. It's not virtual. There's not a digital. You don't give people a digital marble. You give them a real one, and there's a weight to it, and they're quite beautiful little spheres. And there's an alchemy that happens. It's really a penny's worth of recycled glass that, when you receive it from someone with that message, becomes valuable. So just the story that's put behind it makes this valueless object. For some people, it's like their favorite thing all of a sudden because it has this meaning. So that's fascinating as well. Back to like the switching the value equation in the water story. The alchemy of that is kind of, the marble has become a symbol of this conversation, but also the caring and the alchemy of it. And so there they are. It's just out there. If you have received one, pass it on. If you'd like a bag of them to give to your crew and to have this conversation, they're easy to find. They're just blue glass marbles. And there's a woman named Lizzie in the UK that's easy to find. She's got a bunch.
She's been on the show.
Help.
She's been on the show last season.
She's wonderful.
Fantastic. Yes. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, incredible and incredible innovation. And I do want to talk about Billion Baby Turtles and obviously Blue Mind Day as well. But before we get to that, there's a book which you have written, a children's book, which is being released on, I think, August the 9th. And while it doesn't necessarily talk about water, it does talk about the effects of damage on the climate and certainly some of the symptoms of that. And again, just a very innovative way of passing a message on there. Could you just sort of explain the book and the circumstances that led to it?
Sure. Yeah. So summer 2000, August 2000, mid-pandemic, we had a catastrophic wildfire came through our part of the world, and it was set off by a beautiful storm, created 10,000 dry lightning strikes on the land and started over 600 fires. And one of those fires took our home and all of our stuff. And that in itself was beyond tricky. But our daughter had left for college the day before and to start her freshman year in university. And I needed to call and let her know that, everything that she called home was gone. And couldn't really speak very, very well because it was just a tough thing to talk about. And she was crying and I was crying on the phone. And so I wrote her a letter and told her what I was thinking. And that letter has formed basically the backbone of this children's book. And basically the message to her was that her house did its job. It grew her up. We built it around her. It was a joyful place with a lot of visitors and a lot of music and good food and chickens and pets and things. And it did its job. It got her to adulthood, and now she's off exploring. And the message is that we carry our home with us, even though a house may be gone. And I think the message has resonated with people because loss and grief are inevitable, and especially the past 2 years, everybody's lost loved ones. Some people have lost their homes for even financial reasons. Some people have lost their plans or their dream or their job or all of those things. And we all need to kind of figure out how to manage that loss and grief. And so I think the note that I wrote to my daughter Grace could help other kids and even adults. And so it comes out as a book with beautiful illustrations.
Yeah.
Drew Beckmeyer's the illustrator, and he's just a talented guy. And he captured the storm and the fire, but also the love that was in our home when it stood. And he created this. The final illustration is this image of my daughter with a backpack on, standing on a hill overlooking the sea, and then her shadow is is shaped like the shadow of a house, and it's very subtle. And it's really really just so smart of him to just he just really got it. And I just love that image. It's sort of the suggests that her home is still in this girl's exploring and put her stuff on her back, and now she's going exploring around the world, which in fact she is. And then the shadow throne is in the shape of a house with legs.
Yeah.
So it's cute.
It's a cracking book,
So
I heard you sort of reading sections from it on NPR, and just incredibly emotional piece of writing, and certainly the sort of illustrations look incredibly powerful. But another sort of example of being innovative and communicating and sharing things that is a common experience, as you say, with everyone. So there's probably there's definitely far too much to talk about with you, and we want to sort of bring things to an end. But what I'd also like to finish on is Blue Mind Day, because 23rd of July, Saturday 23rd of July 2022, is Blue Mind Day. Could you just tell us a bit about that and the purpose of Blue Mind Day?
Yeah, it seems like everything's got its day. There's a World Hot Dog Day, or World Best Friend Day, and it seems appropriate that there's World Blue Mind Day, and we have World Ocean Day, and we have World Water Day, but World Blue Mind Day is really all about kind of what we were just talking about. Get to your water wherever you are, whatever form the water is in, and take somebody with you. And that's what we will all do on July 23rd each year. And for all of the reasons we've been talking about, the emotional health, the social well-being, that regenerative kind of feedback loop, the physical wellness. And we all know someone who might be a bit sad or a bit tired or a bit burnt out, who hasn't moved much through this pandemic, or who just needs it. Or maybe their paddleboard's gotten dusty. So we all know that person, and we know their name. We know where they live. Go get them on World Blue Mind Day, and any day really, but we're highlighting it on this day. Go get them and get them out with you. And so basically, World Blue Mind Day is not just asking you to do the thing you love to do, but do the thing you love to do with someone who needs to do it with you. And it's as simple as that. And if you feel like sharing your story, go for it. Immortalize it in some form. Take a photo or a video, or sing about it, tweet about it if you're into that, a post on Instagram or whatever social media you use. But it isn't about that. It isn't about clicks, or quite the opposite, really. So share your story in any way you want, and just join us. And the goal is to get a whole bunch of people out there at the water, and get them to bring some new folks to this. So if paddleboarding is your thing, and it seems likely that if you're listening here, it may be, grab an extra board and get somebody on it that maybe has never done it, or get a kid out there, or have them join you on your board. If their mobility is limited. So that's really what it's about. And it's July 23rd.
Jay, thanks so much for joining us. The book Blue Mind is still available. It's been released for 8 years, but still as popular as ever at all good booksellers in a multitude of languages. And Blue Mind Day is the 23rd of July. Jay, we're going to link everything we possibly can in the show notes, but where could people find out more about you and Blue Mind?
Well, the best way is probably just to do a quick search and type the words Blue Mind in quotes, plus whatever word you're interested in, and then see what you find. So if you're interested in paddling, in SUPs, if you're interested in diving, if you're interested in therapy, if you're interested in hospice or children, just throw those words together and do a search, and you'll find lots of good stuff to read and learn. I tend to not direct people to my website or my social media because, frankly, it's not that interesting. You'll be better served by doing a broader search for this idea and the thing that you're interested in. So give that a shot. But if you need to find me, I'm easy to find too.
Jay, thanks so much again. It's been fantastic talking to you, and hopefully we might catch up on the water sometime.
Yes, indeed. Hopefully. Yeah. Thank you so much. Really great conversation. Really appreciate everything that you're doing over there, and let's paddle.